Welcome back to Central Asia. I'm in Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, a gorgeous mountainous country sandwiched between China and Kazakhstan and bordering Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This is a part of the world that is not well known by many Westerners. That's partly because of its remote geography and partly because the region's countries were walled off inside the Soviet Union for the better part of the 20th century. While most everyone here speaks Russian and Kyrgyz, with not a lot of English spoken outside of the younger generation, people are friendly and hospitable, and you won't feel like a stranger for long. Maybe that's why the most common response I hear among people new to this region is surprise. Simply because for those like me who've come here for the first time, it's all rather unexpected. By the way, this city has been known as Bishkek only since 1991. Under the Soviets, it was Frunz, named for a Bolshevik military leader and close friend of Stalin, who was from here. Stalin named the city after it. So why Bishkek? In the Kyrgyz language, a Bishkek is a paddle used to churn milk. Lore has it that a certain woman gave birth while looking for her lost Bishkek and chose it as the name of her son, who grew up to become a Kyrgyz nobleman in the pre-Soviet era. So if someone tells you that the capital of Kyrgyzstan is Milk Paddle, they're not necessarily crazy.
Bishkek is a city of more than 1 million people. It's the country's only city of great size. It's a place of wide boulevards and sprawling public buildings with lots of parks and plazas that reflect its role as a capital during the Soviet era. It remained the capital of independent Kyrgyzstan after 1991.
Until the 1990s, the majority of this city's population were ethnic Russians and other people of European descent, especially Ukrainians and Germans. That's now flipped. Kyrgyz people comprise 75% of the population, Europeans only about 15%. Yet Russian continues to be the main language. Bishkek is a popular place for Westerners to come who want to study the Russian language, but who either cannot or do not want to go to Russia to do it. Not surprisingly, the Russian Orthodox Church still has a strong presence here, even though the majority religion in the country is Sunni Muslim. At least in the central core of the city, everything is very walkable. Not only that, if you want to go from point A to point B and want to avoid the plentiful wide sidewalks along the streets, which are fine, but instead prefer shade and a more scenic view, then you can do as I'm doing and cut through one of the many parks that adorn this city. Of the several impressive plazas marking Bishkek, Alatu Square is considered the main one, a massive open space that's unfortunately for my visit undergoing some renovation. It's not only the fact that renovation here has cut off the main sight lines to this grand plaza, but there's a huge event being set up on the eastern side of it with blockades to prevent you and a stage that prevents you from seeing the buildings on the east side of the plaza. This square was built in 1984 by the Soviets as Lenin Square, and indeed a giant statue of the communist leader was placed at the center of it. After independence, however, Lenin's statue was removed from its choice spot beside where I'm walking to the other side, that is the back side of the dazzling State Museum of History, that you can see in the background. In its place is the statue of Manas, the Kyrgyz national hero and the protagonist of the Epic of Manas, one of the great epic poems of the world, dating back some 300 years, which contains 500,000 lines. Bards have helped to keep the poem alive in the public imagination, with some masters able to recite it all. Alatu, by the way, is the name of the mountain range that towers above the city, with snow-capped peaks topping 16,000 feet. If you saw my video from Almaty in Kazakhstan, you may recall the Tian Shan Mountains visible from there and running along the Kyrgyzstan border. Well, the Alatu Mountains are merely a western extension of the Tian Shan Range. This square has also been the site of some unsettling events since the country's independence. It was ground zero for the so-called Tulip Revolution in 2005, in which 15,000 protesters converged here against the regime of the country's first president. 2 people died and more than 100 were injured when the president called out the troops. The protesters prevailed, and after storming the nearby Capitol building, the president escaped to Moscow, where he went into exile. I've come to the Capitol building just a few hundred feet down the street on Chui Avenue from Alatu Plaza. It may look like I've just walked out of the building, but I assure you I didn't, because you don't go inside here. There's no tour that I'm aware of that would allow you to do so. This is called the White House, and it's not the residence of the president, but rather the home of the president's offices on the 7th floor. Much of the rest of the building is consumed by Parliament. If you can't tell by now, this city is very big on water features. In fact, they're quite luxuriant, which I suppose is the result of so much water that comes down out of these mountains nearby. But all of the public parks, the plazas, and here at the Capitol building itself is luxuriantly supplied with tremendous fountains. Well, I've come to Osh Bazaar, a sprawling marketplace that is among the largest in Bishkek. You find just about anything here. When I first walked in off the street, I was unsure about whether or not there was a main entrance or whether you just dove in on any given alleyway. And unable to find a main entrance, I just dove in. And I've been in a labyrinth ever since. It's a gigantic place with people doing their daily shopping. There are tourists here, of course, but they really become invisible because this is a Kyrgyz institution. You have people coming here every day to buy meat and produce and variety of other things, but also just to see their friends and to gossip. And you don't need to understand the language to tell that that's what's going on. It's just part of the vibe here. You know, at first I thought it was my imagination, but I've got to say, some places have aggressive drivers. And I've noticed here in Bishkek, there's such a thing as an aggressive walker. You'll be walking in a very tight space, and maybe you'll stop over to the side to keep out of people's way, and people just come straight at you. Men, women, children, doesn't matter. It's almost as if they don't see you standing there. Maybe that's some kind of cultural thing, or maybe it's just happenstance of the day, but I've seen it experienced it a number of times already. Like several other bazaars in the city, this one dates to the mid-1980s, which means it was set up under the Soviet regime in the last years before independence. A number of other public works projects occurred here during the same period, and it kind of makes you wonder if it was a case of too little too late for the Soviets devoting attention to the hinterlands as the empire began to slip away. Dumplings, which you see a lot of in Kyrgyzstan. It's places like this that provide a glimpse into real life in Kyrgyzstan. There's nothing really about it. It's just real people and stuff that reflects bedrock tastes in the country, from the garments people wear to the food and drink that you see here. You see a lot of meat on kebabs here, regardless of what it is, whether it's beef or lamb or whatever. But the national dish of Kyrgyzstan is beshmarmak. It's also common in Kazakhstan and in the Xinjiang province in western China, where it's called narin. It consists of horse meat boiled in its own broth for several hours, and then it's served over homemade noodles sprinkled with parsley. And for those who aren't so keen on horse meat, which is very popular here, it also comes in mutton and beef versions. And I wanted to show you a drink that might be called the, well, at least one of the national drinks of the country. It's a milk drink called Maxim. Something very common here, and which I guess only because I'm looking for it I don't see at the moment, but I'm going to tell you what it is anyway. It's a sour drink made from barley, wheat, millet, and corn, and you can mix and match those ingredients to come up with other drinks, each of which have names that I can't recall or pronounce. But if you stay long enough here in Bishkek, you will learn them, I'm sure. While a number of foods here are exotic to Western tastes, breakfast is surprisingly familiar. The Kyrgyz people like to have fried eggs, scrambled eggs, as well as soup and jam and tea and coffee for breakfast. And I know I've been enjoying my breakfast at the buffet just around the corner from my hotel, and I see this firsthand. In fact, it took me aback amidst the many food differences that I see in this country to walk into a restaurant for the first time and see people eating plates that almost look like they could have been served up in some diner in the US. Well, I mentioned earlier that I more or less stumbled into this bazaar, not knowing if there was a main entrance, and having spent quite a bit of time wandering around in this labyrinthine place, lo and behold, as I'm about to leave, I think I just came out at the main entrance. I'm here at another of the city's prominent plazas. This is Victory Square, which, like Alotu Square, was built in the mid-80s, just before the Soviet Union went out of business. The ostensible reason for this square, and why the Soviets tore down the original central market that was here to build it, was to recognize the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II and victory over the Nazis, like so many Soviet-era memorials. This is a vast, treeless space, but it's particularly poignant because the Victory Monument statue here depicts a mother waiting for her husband and perhaps her son to return from the war. She's standing under a funeral wreath held by 3 giant pieces of red granite that together are the shape of a yurt, the iconic dwelling of Kyrgyzstan's historically nomadic people. It's maybe owing to the poignancy and the simple elegance of this monument that it is among the most popular in Bishkek.
Next from Kyrgyzstan, a trip to the Alatu Mountains that tower above the capital.
Sprinkles are beginning to fall together, as am I.